Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is James Martinez. I am the admissions counselor for the University of Houston College of Pharmacy. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for our career pathways in pharmacy. I want to let you know that we do have a presentation for you all today, and then we will have time for questions. And I'll leave it up to our guest speaker, Dr. DeGracia, whether or not you want to do questions during the session or if you want to wait until the end. I'll let you make that decision and then we'll go from there. But for everyone who does have questions, either throughout the session or whether we wait until the end, feel free to unmute your mics and ask, or also use the chat box. I will be happy to monitor the chat box for us and make sure that we're getting those questions answered. But without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the day, Dr. Michelle DeGracia.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Mr. Martinez. Let me take over here. Let me start sharing my screen. All right. Are you guys able to see that in presentation mode? Perfect.
That's perfect.
All right, so again, welcome to this Career Pathways in Pharmacy. I'm happy to see such a great turnout today. So I know that, pharmacy, the field of pharmacy after COVID and everything coming to light has been getting kind of a bad rap, but I hope that this presentation gets you a little bit more excited as to what the possibilities are. To what the possibilities can be after you graduate from pharmacy school, if this is the route that you're in currently or that you choose to go into. As he mentioned, my name is Dr. Michelle DeGracia. I'm one of the postdoc academic fellows here at the University of Houston College of Pharmacy. And let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for our learning objectives for today, I want us to review pharmacy career options. We'll then discuss a little bit about pharmacy job descriptions, what each of these different career options might entail. And then we'll describe kind of the different training needed for pursuing different career paths. Now, I welcome any questions that you might have today. Feel free to put them in the chat. And then I'll open it up for questions at the end. If you do type them in the chat, I won't be monitoring it regularly, but we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So this is a very long list, but also not a comprehensive list as far as career options goes. So the ones at the top, your community, your hospital pharmacy, this is where the bulk of your pharmacy career, a lot of the people in the workforce right now work. It makes up about 90% of all pharmacists. Now, hospital pharmacy makes up even more. It's very much an umbrella term because there are different specialties that go under hospital pharmacy. But as you can see, definitely not a deficit in the different areas that you can pursue. And so we're going to talk about each of these a little bit today. So let's start with our community pharmacy. So this is your typical, usually what people think about first at your CVS, your Walgreens, your H-E-B, your Costco, that pharmacist that works behind the counter there. So a fun fact that we always love to tell students and prospective candidates is that a pharmacist is your most accessible healthcare worker. You don't have to set up an appointment with us. You can literally go to the counter of your pharmacy and ask to speak with your pharmacist. And we're your medication experts there to help you answer your questions. So these are things like your retail pharmacies, like I mentioned, your outpatient pharmacies, as well as something that we like to call specialty pharmacies. So some things that you might not know is that different entities such as Walgreens, CVS, and a number of other ones have what we call specialty pharmacies. And these are typically for your disease states that are have special medications that they need to use. So maybe your patients with HIV, your patients with cancer, they might not be able to pick up their medication from just a retail pharmacy down the street. So they might have to go to these specialty pharmacies, and community pharmacists with additional training are some of the people who help these service these. So the roles of your community pharmacists, some of you might be serving as pharmacy technicians right now, so you might be very familiar with the roles and responsibilities, but typically they'll be filling and dispensing medications, providing medication counseling. And essentially what that is if you've never had this medication before, or if it's been a very, very long time since you've taken it, then you provide instructions to the patient as to how to take it. You answer questions like, How often do I need to take this? What happens if I miss a dose? How should I store this medication? Some things that you might not think about as the patient, or you might go home and think, oh, I have all these questions now. I don't exactly know how to take this. The pharmacist is there to help counsel. Another big one, especially in the past couple of years, is administering vaccines. So you might have gotten your flu vaccine, your COVID vaccine from a pharmacist. You do get licensed whenever you are in pharmacy school, or you get certified to give immunizations. Some pharmacy technicians also have this certification, and we're able to administer vaccines in a retail pharmacy setting. And then last is your over-the-counter medication counseling. So, you walk into a grocery store and you see the lines and the shelves of all of these different medications. They all have the same generic product, but they all have different brand names, different packaging, and you might have no idea. You might be overwhelmed as to what you might want to pick. And so these pharmacists are there to help answer those questions, help you decide which product over the other, what side effects might occur, what you can expect. So the next one I wanted to talk about, because it kind of goes hand in hand with community, because a lot of these are in your community setting, is a compounding pharmacy. So to give a little bit of background as to a compounding pharmacy, compounded medications are custom medications made to meet the needs of an individual patient. So certain medications might not be commercially available, or a patient might have certain intolerances. So in pills, in capsules, in all of these different dosage forms of medications, the active ingredient is not necessarily the only thing that's in those. You have things that like binding agents, or things that help absorb the drug or disintegrate the drug. And these are what we call excipients. And some patients might be allergic to some of these ingredients. And so with these certain tolerances, these compounding pharmacies are able to make different dosage forms, such as pills, capsules, liquids, and able to allow the patient to take these. So roles and reasons for customizing medications. Some patients might not want to take their medication because it doesn't taste great. And a big thing as pharmacists that we like to counsel on is adherence. And essentially what that is making sure the patient is taking their medication as prescribed and they're not missing their doses. Because if you think about it, with different disease states like high blood pressure, diabetes, it's really important that these patients are taking their medication on a regular basis. And if they're not, because they can't tolerate it, then that would be a big problem. And so that's where these compounding pharmacies come into play. So they can add flavoring or improve taste of medication. They can also customize different strengths or dosages. Another one that I mentioned earlier is if they're allergic to, say, an excipient in that dosage form, then they might have that allergy to a commercially made medication, so they can make something else for you, and then a different dosage form if needed. I'm sure some of us have been prescribed medications where the pill is huge and you're like, how in the world am I going to take this? Well, sometimes, especially for pediatric patients, something that we think about is maybe administering something like a liquid, and these compounding pharmacies are able to do that as well. The next one I want to talk about, which is near and dear to my heart, because this is how I practiced in my last year when I did my residency, is hospital pharmacy. So they have a responsibility to manage and monitor patients' medications in a hospital setting. And so with hospital pharmacy, these are your medication experts in the hospital, of course. And so there are typically two realms that we think about these pharmacists in. We have our staff pharmacists and we have our clinical specialists. And so our staff pharmacists are typically the ones who will work in either a centralized or more of a decentralized area. And they might be assigned a unit or a floor or a section of the hospital. And anytime a physician puts an order in, they're there to verify that order. They say, okay, is this for the right patient? Is this the right medication? Is this the disease state that we're trying to treat? Is it appropriate? Do they have any allergies? And things like that. And then the next realm is your clinical specialists. So these are your pharmacists who have gone through additional training after pharmacy school to specialize in a certain field of pharmacy. And I'll get into that a little bit more in our next slide. But essentially the roles are to recommend treatment after diagnosis. So a lot of times we'll round with the hospital team, we'll go and see our patients on our designated floors, or if we're in a specialty, the people who we've been consulted for, and we'll recommend treatment after the physician has diagnosed the patient. Next is managing medication dosing. So as a pharmacist, it's really important that we look at things like lab values, vitals, so that we're able to manage doses correctly. Next is monitoring for safety and efficacy. Again, these patients are in the hospital, so we have the luxury of doing that, making sure that after we do give the drug, we are able to monitor for these things. Again, that will come with looking at things like lab values and vital signs. And then medication histories and counseling, which is really important. Typically, this is done in the emergency department, and pharmacy technicians are typically the ones to do this. But it's really important that if we don't have an up-to-date record of what the patient is on at home, we want to make sure that what they're on at home is what they're getting in the hospital if we're able to give it to them. Or let's say they come in later in the evening and they've already taken all their doses of medication. We want to make sure that we're not doubling up on those doses, things like that. That's why medication histories are important. And then lastly, I mentioned this a little bit with rounding with the team. You work very closely with other members of the healthcare team. So your nurses will come and ask you questions. They'll call down to the pharmacy and ask if they can give certain medications. And then of course your physicians, you come up with these medication regimens to best treat your patient. So as I mentioned previously, we have these clinical pharmacist specialties. And so a lot of times when I talk to my family about how I became a pharmacist, they very much always think of the retail setting. But because my training has been in hospital, they didn't know that these things exist, that you can specialize in things like cardiology, infectious diseases, oncology. And as I mentioned earlier, you do a little bit of extra training, typically another 2 years after you graduate from pharmacy school. And you'll start to become very specialized in these areas. So with infectious diseases, you'll get to know all the different disease states and how to treat it with your antibiotics, your antifungals, et cetera. And so again, this takes a lot of additional training, but it's because you're really trying to hone your craft. You're trying to get as much exposure so you know how to treat these patients in these different settings. So the other one that I wanted to mention right after hospital pharmacy is pharmacy administration. And this is a big one that is very also up and coming because we always need help with pharmacy operations and management. So these pharmacists deliver patient care and pharmacy operational services. Clinical management and effective leadership skills are definitely needed for this job. And this is why if you go this career path, it's typically also 2 years after pharmacy school. So the roles for these pharmacy administrators, they oversee pharmacy operations. They serve as that leader for pharmacists and pharmacy staff. Some of them might lead financial performance. Another big one, especially I remember this during my residency when we were trying to get all the different medications for COVID and the vaccine, their role was to do this medication access for effective and affordable medications. And then lastly is emergency operations. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, but these are kind of the major things they do. And for that last bullet point, emergency operations, for those of you who might be from the Houston area, there might be a hurricane or there might be flooding and we're not able to get the medications that we need right away. So we have all of these different protocols in place to be able to make sure that the hospital from a medication standpoint can still run smoothly. Next, which is the second one that's also near and dear to my heart because this is what I'm currently doing, is academia. And so for academia, we apply our pharmacy knowledge and expertise to educate, train, and develop the next generation of pharmacists. So if you're coming into pharmacy school, if you're already in pharmacy school, these are your faculty. These are the people who are training you to be the best pharmacist that you can be in this pharmacy school setting. And so typically you have your clinical faculty, while not all faculty might have practice sites. Of course, that big bulk of what academia is teaching. And then another thing is what we call scholarship or research. And so with our clinical faculty, those are your ones who they might have they do have a practice site and then they come back and they teach. And they also take students on rotation with them whenever it comes to those experiential rotations. And so again, their roles are to develop and deliver lectures to pharmacy students. For the clinical faculty, say we have a lot of faculty in infectious diseases, so they're the content expert for lectures prepared. So whenever we get to the infectious diseases portion of what we learn in the didactic setting, they're able to teach that and they'll be the content expert. Another big thing is conducting research. So for our clinical faculty, a lot of what they do is the clinical side of research, but there's also a whole different realm that I've been learning since I've been in academia, looking at things like student outcomes. My current research project right now is looking at predictors affecting academic progression. So we can look at different things from that point of view. Another big one is mentorship. You know, we're the most accessible during those 4 years of your pharmacy school career. And so while you're looking into what you want to do in the future, we can serve as those mentors for you. And then I have an asterisk there for clinical practice, because as I mentioned, not all faculty have a practice site, but the majority of them do. All right, this one is a hot topic right now because a lot of people are starting to open more programs and go into this field of industry. So a lot of what they do is marketing, sales, and R&D, or research and development. I'm definitely no expert in the field of industry, but this is this is the gist of kind of what each of these different roles do. So there's a lot of different areas in which you can go into in industry. So you have MSLs, or your medical science liaisons, your regulatory affairs, again, R&D and marketing. So with MSLs, they link research and development with the commercial side of business, and then they give this in-depth scientific and medical information. For regulatory affairs, you take all that clinical trial data for the new drugs that might be coming out. And what I forgot to mention is these are typically from your big pharmaceutical companies. So GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb, these are your industry. Another one is research and development. So you serve in the laboratory setting to help develop new drug products and evaluate already existing products. And then marketing, which is exactly what it sounds like. You create and deliver promotional materials on your company's products, depending on where you work. And this one is a fun one because a lot of people don't know that we can do this, but veterinary pharmacy. So veterinary pharmacists are these animal health professionals with advanced clinical pharmacy training who provide pharmaceutical care for a variety of species and breeds of animals. So you can go from dogs to cats to even horses, birds, you name it. And fun fact is pharmacists are the only health profession that can care for both humans and animals. Because in order to be a veterinary pharmacy, you go through the same pharmacy training that your colleague in going into hospital pharmacy, but you'll have that additional training after you graduate. So roles are very similar to those in a community setting. You'll direct patient evaluation and care, you fill and dispense medication, you'll counsel, and then you'll compound medications as well, which is a big one because not a lot of these formulations might exist right off the bat. Another one is nuclear pharmacy. I've had a lot of students approach me about this one. I wish I knew more about it, but I did my best to find some research. I did a lot of rotations at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and they use a lot of this nuclear pharmacy as well. So for those of you who might not know or might not be familiar with this field, is that this is the use of radioactive drugs for the diagnosis or treatment of a disease. This one, because of the dangerous, the dangerous handling of dangerous material, additional training is required. So you need an extra 500 practice hours after you get all of your other training in order to work in nuclear pharmacy. The beauty of nuclear pharmacy, it has, you can work, a lot of people love to work, whenever they love to work at night, they go into nuclear pharmacy because of all the different procedures that have to be done the next day. And so a lot of the work has to be done at night. But work hours are very flexible, and you do this in an enclosed lab due to the hazardous materials. So the roles that these pharmacists have, they'll prepare radioactive compounds, research and test radiopharmaceuticals. They have to do a lot of research in terms of how to store it, because again, these are hazardous materials and you want to make sure that they're away from everything else. And then monitoring for any adverse reactions. Next is AmCare, or ambulatory care pharmacy. So these are your pharmacists who, if you think about a clinic setting, when you go see your PCP in a clinic setting, then this is typically that pharmacist there. So you manage patients with other healthcare providers in an outpatient setting. These are often the management of chronic disease states such as diabetes, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia. And so they'll provide direct patient care services for patients with chronic illnesses. So we might see you every month or so, and then we'll make medication dose adjustments depending on how you're doing. We'll monitor, and then medication reconciliation is another big one, because we want to make sure that, say you went to the hospital since you've been back and they put you on something there, that we want to make sure that we have an up-to-date list of your medications. Next, as I mentioned, say you went to the hospital and you were admitted, and then you come and you see your PCP, we participate in that transitions of care. And then lastly is providing educational classes or visits. So if patients have additional questions as far as their medications go, or if they want to just learn more about what might be happening to them, then we're able to provide them that information. Another big one, this is another hot career option right now, is informatics. And so this is improving data usage in the healthcare setting to optimize patient care and healthcare decisions. And so these are your people who are both clinically minded and tech savvy. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times whenever we have order sets built into hospital orders, or if alerts need to be fired to make sure that we don't overdose patients, informatics is in charge of that. So they definitely need to be both clinically minded and technology minded. And so they need an understanding of also pharmacy operations, pharmacy practice. A big one is medication safety. As I mentioned, they can set alerts to make sure that things are double checked, or there's no overdose, or a patient might already be on a medication and the doctor tries to order it again, and making sure you don't have duplicate therapy. And then regulations and standards as well. So there's a number of different things that these informatics pharmacists can do. A few of them are data management, practice analytics, and then clinical informatics. Another realm that we can go to is research. This one goes kind of hand in hand. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the realm of investigational drug services, but this is kind of where that ties in as well. So they investigate the development of new drugs through drug and clinical trials. So as these new drugs come to market, these are the pharmacists that are testing said drugs and doing studies on them. Specialized pharmacy practice area, where pharmacists can meet the needs of clinical study sites and also help protect study data. So whenever we have clinical trials, you always need to make sure that that data is kept in a well-locked place, making sure that nobody else can access it, tamper with it, etc. So the roles would be record keeping, shipping, ordering and handling, ensuring the integrity of products and data, and then ensuring the safety of the participants as well. And lastly, we have our consultant pharmacists. So they provide expert advice on patient medications and drug therapy management. In my couple of years of practice so far, I've mainly seen this for the geriatric population. So sometimes they'll have a consultant pharmacist go to nursing homes and help with medication regimens there. And so they perform medication reviews. They ensure medication safety and efficacy for patients. Again, you want to make sure that you come up with the best therapeutic plan for your patients. And so you want to collaborate and communicate with other healthcare providers. And then you provide your clinical expertise after you come up with all the facts and you draw your conclusions and you're able to make a recommendation. So some of the postgraduate pharmacy tracks, you might be asking, well, okay, this is the one I'm interested, but how do I get there? And so for the most part, for those of you who want to go into one of the specialties that I might have listed, pharmacy administration, veterinary pharmacy, and informatics, I should have put an asterisk there because you don't necessarily need a residency for informatics, but you would pursue the residency route. So typically there's a PGY1 or a postgrad year 1. And then for those who want to do, your PGY1, which is your general, you go on different rotations and you get exposure to see if you might want to pursue another specialty. And if you do, if that ends up being what you want to do, you can do a second year or a PGY2 year, and you can specialize in, say, that cardiology, that oncology. Those who want to do fellowship, academia, myself, I'm in a fellowship right now as I'm training to be an academician. You can get into academia in a number of ways though as well. You can be a clinical specialist for a few years and go practice and get that experience under your belt, and then go into academia if teaching is something that you love. And then industry, you will have to do a fellowship. So typically that'll be a 1 to 2 year post-grad training. And then for those who want to do pharmacy administration, I know it might be a little confusing because it's here in 2 boxes, but a lot of times you'll get your MS or your master's degree whenever you go into pharmacy administration as well. So you'll be doing that simultaneously while you're in your residency. And then typically those who go into research will go into some sort of grad program, whether that be an additional PhD program or just additional training afterward. Okay, and so I wanted to provide these links as additional resources for you to access whenever you have any questions. If you're really interested in something but are not too sure right now about what you want to land on, I think these are great resources. Another big thing as I am finishing up my fellowship and starting to look at jobs myself is just read pharmacist job descriptions, see what that bulleted list looks like in terms of what your responsibilities might be. And if it's something that you're interested, then it might be something worth pursuing. And then lastly, I wanted to say, talk to your most accessible healthcare provider, a pharmacist. And so if you have those questions, feel free to pick their brain, ask them questions about why they went into pharmacy, what they love about it, and how they landed on the career path that they chose. So I know that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time, but right now I want to open it up to any questions that you might have.
And again, for anyone with questions, you can either use the chat box or you can unmute and ask out loud.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm actually interested in pediatric pharmacy. I was wondering if you had kind of more in-depth information about going into pediatric pharmacy. I understand that you will need residency, but I'm not sure how long, or if it's kind of additional residency considering it's specializing in pediatrics.
Sure, that's a great question, Jessica. So for pediatrics, like you mentioned, it will be residency. So you'll get some first year residencies are already specialized in pediatrics. So you might not have to do a generalized PGY1, if that makes sense, because a lot of PGY1s are in pharmacy practice, but there are some that are very honed in on pediatrics, but typically you'll have to do a PGY2, especially because the pediatric population is so complicated. There's not a lot of guidelines in how to treat them. You learn a lot by your experiences with them. And so that's typically what that's going to look like. So probably looking at another 2 years after pharmacy school.
And does University of Houston offer, a bunch of residency opportunities within pediatrics?
I mean, so the way that residency works is they're affiliated with the hospitals. So because we're near the Texas Medical Center, we have Texas Children's here, which is a big one. And then Texas in general has a lot of great pediatrics programs. There's some in Dallas, and then those are the 2 that come off right off the top of my head. Like I said, it's a really tough realm to go in, but an incredibly rewarding one just because of how complicated these patients might be. But it's definitely doable. A lot of my friends have gone into that field and they love it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, George.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think you indicated a lot of a number of pharmacy settings, but I don't think I saw private pharmacy or independent pharmacy. Yeah, how about that?
Yes, yes. I mean, that is a big one too. I know a lot of my friends had big goals to open up their own pharmacy, and that's definitely definitely a route that people can go. Dr. Mia, if you have additional things to say as far as independent pharmacy, by all means. But it takes a lot of practice, a lot of people. There's a lot of red tape that goes into it. I do know that.
Okay, because I have a friend,
Uh-huh.
owns a private pharmacy, Empirical Pharmacy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking. But he used to work with, with some somewhere with, I don't know if it's ambulatory or hospital pharmacy. Then
Yeah.
eventually, that's how we raise this capital, because you need a capital, right? To raise.
Yes.
But that's my end goal, to own my own
Yeah.
after I'm done with all that, all those, all those, settings.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people who love to go into the management side of things without having to do like the hospital setting, they'll open up their own pharmacies and then they can manage things from there. So it's still a great field to go into.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, George. And Dr. DeGracia, we do have two questions in
Sure.
the chat box. Do you feel it will be easy or difficult to find a job after graduating?
That's a great question. I feel like we're all kind of in limbo with that. I feel like we're at a little bit, a lot of people left after COVID, just to be completely honest. A lot of people, burnout is very real. I don't want to sugarcoat that at all, especially after doing my training in a hospital setting during the peak of COVID. But if you guys are going into pharmacy school, then I think we'll be on the uptrend and where the demand will be much greater. And so I wouldn't be too worried about that, especially with all of these different fields opening up and people realizing just the potential that pharmacists might have.
Thank you, Michelle. And then another one. This is in regards to nuclear pharmacy and getting the additional 500 hours. So how do we go about getting the additional 500 hours of training?
So pretty much you would have to look for a nuclear pharmacy to take you on for either an internship or another program, and you would work with them to get your 500 hours.
And I can say we do have a nuclear pharmacist in the RGV as part of our RGV satellite program.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's part of the rotations or anything like that, but I know that we have a nuclear pharmacist there who has spoken at some of our sessions. So it's possible that maybe we could put you in contact with that individual. Another question, are specialties something that you get to select to go into, or do you have to apply for them? Like, is it like applying for school again?
That's a great question. So for residencies, we participate in what we call a match. And for those of you who might be familiar with residencies in pharmacy school or even medical school, it's very similar. So you apply. I wouldn't say like applying to pharmacy school, but you'll get letters of recommendation. You'll write a letter of intent. You'll send in your transcript. So I guess you could equate that. And to whatever programs that you want, depending on location, what they offer, the different rotations they have. And then they might potentially invite you for an interview. And once they do that, then you're able to rank them. And what they do is you rank them and they rank you. And if at any point that matches up, that's what we call the match, you will be matched to that program. And so that's typically how going into residency will work.
I have another question. My question is that I did not hear you mention the licensure. You need it in order to go to take any of those, to go into any of those paths. The NAPLEX.
Oh, yes.
Oh, you must have it in order to take it.
So I will let you know that 99% of what 99.8% of what I presented, you will need the NAPLEX for. So industry is a little different, George, in the sense that not because if you go into something like marketing, you don't necessarily need your PharmD for it, but they like that you have that pharmacy background. The thing is, though, you go through 4 years of pharmacy school, and to not get your license after, you know, you don't want to go about it doing that way. I mean, me personally. And so some people wait a year after they've been in practice as far as a fellowship for industry goes to get their license. Some people wait a couple years, but I would highly recommend that while the information is fresh and while you go in and take your NAPLAX right after you finish pharmacy school. But all the other realms that I talked about, you definitely will need a PharmD for.
All right, and Michelle, a couple more.
Sure.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
Do we need a fellowship for informatics?
You do not, no. So some people have been getting into informatics with just the sheer amount of practice that they've had. There's a lot of residency programs, though, that are starting to focus on that because it's getting a little bit more technical. And so maybe not a fellowship, but potentially a residency.
And then from Jessica, and if I misunderstand the question, Jessica, please chime in. Do you need to pay to go into residency? Or are
no, so you are a full-on pharmacist at that point. They actually pay you. So that is your job. You are a pharmacy resident. You won't be making as much as a pharmacist at that point because you're still in your training years, but they actually pay you. You do not need to pay them.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
For the private pharmaceutical companies, as far as research, do they offer the opportunities? Is it like an internship? What is the process if you want to get to the research program with those companies?
Yeah, some of them do offer internships, so that's something you want to be on the lookout for when summer rolls around and you're not doing any. I wouldn't say not doing anything. You will always be doing something for pharmacy school, but whenever you're kind of on your off time. So during the summers, a lot of those internships will open up. A lot of them are on the East Coast, so you need to be able to travel to do those. But because of how COVID kind of changed remote working, some of them you'll be able to do remotely as well, just depending on what the job description is. But yeah, I mean, they're posted online just as regular job openings, and your College of Pharmacy will be a really great resource as well to be able to provide those internships.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And really quickly, I know we have a couple more questions in the chat box.
Sure.
So make sure that we have plenty of time. So
yes.
For those who have questions, we will make time to answer them. But I want to direct your attention to the chat box. We have a quick post survey, and this is just to make sure that we are able to answer the questions throughout this session, but also to get more information from you all for future sessions and what topics might be of interest for you. So if you would, I'm dropping that in the chat box. It'll just take 30 seconds. Let us know what additional support that we can continue to provide, and then we'll jump right back into the questions, okay? All right, I think that's pretty good. All right, cool. So let's jump back to the questions. I'll
Awesome.
read a couple for you.
Sure.
After graduating, can you go straight into working in academia, or do you need additional training?
So I would highly recommend additional training just because the people who you will be applying, everybody applying for that same position will probably have years of experience. The wonderful thing about that I've been experiencing as I've been applying for academia jobs and faculty positions across the country is that they see the fellowship here specifically at UH, and it's very tailored to working in the setting of academia that, say, your clinician might not have that experience in. So I would definitely get more experience because it's hard to teach what you don't know, right? It's hard to teach about things that you've never had practice in. And so at least get that year or two of practice under your belt and then go into academia. And I think you'd be better for it, and your students would be appreciative of that as well.
All right, and then another one from the chat box. How early can one join a research group, and how does that process work?
Yeah, you can join as early as before you get into pharmacy school, or as soon as you start, you can jump right in. If you do start when you start pharmacy school, U of H has wonderful opportunities for you to kind of meet and greet the different professors who are working on different research projects, and you can see what you might be interested in. Another great thing is if you go to our website at UH, you can see who kind of runs the labs, the different research that they do, and their email address is listed right there for your convenience. So you can reach out and ask those questions, but you can literally get started today if you wanted to, just ask.
I have a question, but it's more on the pharmacy program at University of Houston.
Sure.
So I did the prerequisites and only have one more class to do. I just want to know, like, do I start applying for the application now, or?
So I can take that one.
Because the deadline is May 2nd, and I talked to James about it. I emailed him for any questions I have. I don't know if you're familiar with me, Amira Harper, but
I
yeah.
sure am.
You should.
I recognize your name right away.
There you go.
So yeah,
yeah.
I was able to join to ask you about, I only had the genetics class left. I asked you, was it going to be biology 109 or 241? You told me the biology 241 is great. So right now I'm currently taking my organic chemistry class 2, and I just got genetics. I was trying to say, should I take that in the summer and still do my application, or?
Yeah, so if you're wanting to apply for fall 22, we do allow for students to take science courses in the summer. So if you want to go ahead, I would submit your application sooner than later. And once we get it, we will see that you're still finishing, I think it's organic 2 and then genetics in the summer, and that'll be fine, right? Because it's totally normal for students to apply with 1, even sometimes 2 semesters remaining worth of coursework. So you'd be in a great position, okay?
Okay, because the organic 2 is over in May 1st. So
Yeah,
then
that's
that's when to do genetics in the summer for the 8 weeks. So that's why I was trying to say, can I still do the application? Because I'm almost done. I just got one more tab to go, and I think that's just the regular general information.
Yeah, that'll be fine. Yeah,
Okay.
so by May 2nd, and this is for anyone else out there who's maybe in the same situation, by May 2nd, you need to submit the application, pay the fee, and have your transcript sent to PharmCast, okay? So even if there's coursework pending that's after May 2nd, that's perfectly fine. We just need to make sure that we have your letters of recommendations and all of those required documents.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you, Amira. Another question from the chat box. Would you recommend working in a hospital or another setting as a pharmacy intern during pharmacy school?
That's an excellent question. So there are a couple different ways to go, and I will answer your question with another question of what would you want to pursue. So for those of you who want to go into a retail setting, you can go and be a pharmacy intern at a CVS or a Walgreens, Kroger. The options are endless there, and you can get more experience with that. If you think that hospital is what you want to do, then a hospital internship would be the way to go. It just depends on what you want to be exposed to, what you're curious about, and what you might want more answers to your questions for. None is a wrong answer. People who are in retail internships get hospital residencies all the time. And some people, when they're exposed to hospital, they're like, this isn't what I thought it would be, or this is not really what I wanted to do. And so they'll go back to retail. Again, a big thing with just the overall, my big piece of advice, I guess I would say at the end of this presentation, is really just get as much exposure as you can, because some people will have this be locked in on this one idea in their mind and say, this is what I want to pursue. This, I'm 100% all in. Get exposure to it. Ask somebody to shadow. I know with COVID, it's been really hard to get your foot in the door to shadow anybody in a hospital setting. But if you have the chance, then definitely do it, because it might be everything you dreamed of. And you're like, yes, now I'm 110% sure that I want to do this. Or it might not be everything that you dreamed of, and you're like, maybe I should explore different avenues, and that's totally fine, you know. And we're here to serve as your resources as well, to help you figure out the answers to those questions you might have. I apologize. I know that was a long-winded response, but just kind of wanted to give, you know, one big takeaway, like expose yourself to as many different realms of pharmacy as you can. All right. I can look at the chat.
I have a question, Dr.
Yeah,
Gracia.
sure.
Actually, so your presentation was very helpful. Thank you so much. But I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the fellowship in industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will do my best. Like I said, industry is not one of the things that I'm 100% familiar with, just because it's so up and coming right now, and a lot of my friends want that realm. But it confused me because none of them got their PharmDs right out of pharmacy school. So I wasn't quite sure in terms of like what they touch in the pharmacy world compared to what I do in a hospital. So from what I know, a lot of them ended up being MSLs, or these medical science liaisons. And let me go back to that slide. So here, let's see. Where is it?
So I'm a little bit familiar with that. I was just curious, I guess, what exactly the fellowship consisted of. Is that like a year-long program? Or...
Yeah, so it's a year-long, basically a fellowship or a residency is training. So before we, you know, send you off on your way and let you fly on your own, it's that chance to kind of be exposed to all the different entities, I guess, in industry, and figure out what exactly it is that you want to do. And some are very specialized too. Like we talked a little bit earlier, your first year can be very much pediatrics, you know, they're just depending on the program that you apply to. And some of these can very much be MSL, regulatory affairs, research and development. And so you'll definitely be in that training year before, you know, we just let you off on your own. So gotcha. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Yes, a little bit. So who hosts those programs? Like, would you apply to a pharmaceutical company as an intern and say, I'm trying to complete a fellowship? Or
sure. So a lot of them participate in the match. And so what that means is you'll research whatever programs, whether that be Bristol Myers Squibb, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, and some of them are actually affiliated with pharmacy schools. And you'll apply like you're doing a residency. It's not like an internship. Internship is more of, and I'm gonna kind of answer the next question that's in the chat there. Internship is more of your training while you're in pharmacy school, getting more exposure into what you want to do. And then your residency and your fellowship, you're full on pharmacist. You finish those 4 years, you've hopefully gotten your with residency, you have to, with fellowship, not so much, but hopefully you have your doctorate degree by then. You are a full-fledged pharmacist, and you're able to do the things that pharmacists do. And so you have a lot more autonomy in that post-graduate training. And so as a student, a lot of what you do is shadowing and working up patients and giving your recommendations to preceptors to then give to the team, or you can give it directly to the team depending on who your preceptor is. But yeah, you have that autonomy. Sorry, I know I was going off on a little bit of a tangent there, but hopefully that helps.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Awesome. And I'll answer that last part of Jessica's question. Don't apologize for the questions. I'm here to answer as many as I can, and would be happy to clarify anything. So I hope I answered your difference between internships and residencies. Would you need to do an internship to make a good resume to apply for residency? It definitely looks great just because you have that exposure. A lot of people do internships and then apply to the same hospital for that residency. So say they do an internship, for those of you familiar with the Houston area, at Houston Methodist, and then they'll apply for residency at Houston Methodist because they're like, I know the people who I've worked with, they know my work ethic, they know, and I know the operations here. And it looks good, and they'd be confident to take you on, but it's not required. I'll be honest, I did not do an internship and I still got a residency. And so, like I said, it's an added piece on your application, but it's not an end all be all if you don't have one. And then residency is something you would go into right after pharmacy school. Typically, some people can apply. So some people don't match after they apply when they graduate pharmacy school. And so you can always try again if you don't match. And I've had friends that did that, and they love where they are. They went and practiced in retail for a year, made sure to keep the information fresh in their head, and then they went and they did a residency afterwards. So not too much of a timeline, but you will have to have your degree before you go into a residency.
Thank
So
you.
I hope that
helps a lot.
Jessica.
Yeah, it did help a lot.
And I'll move to the last slide. Again, I have my email here for any questions that you might think of after the fact, and I'd be happy to answer any of them. And I see Brandy has a question as well. Does taking part in research is it an advantage for getting into a residency program? I would say so, because in your residency, you will have to do a research project. And so it shows that you've had those steps, you know what it takes to fulfill those requirements in your residency. But again, it's like an internship. It's not an end all be all. People aren't going to completely write you off because you haven't had research experience. We all start somewhere. And if that's in your residency, that's okay. That's okay. Any other questions?
Two that I'll tackle real quick from the
Sure.
admissions side of things. And these two questions came in from the survey that we just put out. So
Sure.
the question about whether or not the pcat is required. The pcat is optional right now for fall 22 and fall 23 as well. It is optional. So we do recommend it. It's another area that the admissions committee can look at and determine, the caliber of your candidacy. So it can certainly be a benefit, but it is optional. And with it being optional, if you don't have it, no worries. There's nothing there to evaluate. Okay. So there's the pcat question. For students who are curious about prerequisite courses, I will provide a link in the chat box to help you with prereqs. We do have regular sessions that are admissions based. Those are for requirements, what coursework to cover, how to apply, things like that. So continue to check your email and you will see some of those coming up in the very near future because we do typically have at least one of those per month. All right. I also have some recorded versions. So I'll put a couple links for those in the chat box for you all to take a look at. Make sure you can save those. But let's jump back to any questions that we have for Dr. DeGracia. Feel free again to unmute and say it out loud, or you can use the chat box.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is the IPPE and during the summer P1s and P2s, are they similar or the same as internships, or
No, great question. So typically I'm gonna say no, mainly because, well, one, it's a requirement. So you need that to be able to graduate. And it's more of just an exposure. So an internship, it's a little bit more labor intensive, whereas your IPPE, you're really trying to get exposure. Not to say that your preceptor won't have work for you to do, which might be similar to what you do in an internship. But internships are typically longitudinal. And what we mean by that is they'll go throughout your pharmacy school, your time in pharmacy school, whereas IPPEs are typically in blocks. So either a month or 6 weeks and things like that. So much more condensed.
Can I like a follow-up question?
Sure.
Would you recommend pharmacy students take on internship during their pharmacy school career?
It just depends. Some people, they'll get into pharmacy school, and I know we talk about the rigor, but you don't really feel it until you get into it. And if it's something that you can handle, if it's something that you're able to put into your routine, then I would say go for it. It would set you up greatly if a residency is what you wanted to do, or if you wanted to work in a specific retail setting. I've had a lot of friends who did internships in the retail setting with either CVS or Walgreens, Randall's, and they get hired on right away afterwards. So it's definitely a pro, but of course, it won't be a pro if it makes your studies suffer. You can't become a pharmacist unless you pass the PharmD curriculum. And so always keep that in mind. School is your number one priority, but if you can handle it and you can have that exposure, it sets you up to be a really great candidate.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I looked at the salary scale.
Sure, George. Yeah, no, that's fair.
They indicated that pharmacists make like 1,300 a year. So and pharmacy education is very expensive. Also, I've looked at the U of H, and everything, and this is very expensive. By the time you finish, you might incur like 200,000, especially if you are funding your pharmacy education with a loan.
Right.
So
right.
What they pay you is should be a matter of concern. So what point do they at once start making that 1,400 a year? At what point after your family?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question? So at what point of your PharmD?
After you get PharmD, at what point can you start making that money?
Oh, got it. Yeah. I mean, it just depends. And so, like I mentioned, if retail is something that you want to do, you can do that, right after you graduate pharmacy school. Of course, you have to wait and you take your NAPLEX before you are independently practicing as a pharmacist, but you're able to make that salary. As a resident, as I mentioned earlier, you're still in your training. And so you'll make less than, say, a retail pharmacist would right off the bat, or a full-fledged pharmacist. But again, you're in your training years, and then depending on the job that you get after, you'll be making more. It just depends.
Oh, all right, thank you.
Yeah. I know we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to address Catherine's question. For APPEs and IPPEs in pharmacy school, do you have to pick your preceptors, or are you assigned preceptors, or both? And I want to say thank you right back to you, Catherine, for joining us for this talk today. So this is a great question. This has changed since I've been a student here. I graduated in 2020, which doesn't seem very long ago, but I'm in what we call the old curriculum, and we're now in a new set of curriculum right now. For APPEs, I do know you're able to pick your preceptors, and you kind of state your case as to why you want them to be your preceptor. Do you get them 100% of the time? I'm going to cautiously say no, just because if everybody wants that one preceptor, not everybody's going to get that one preceptor. With IPPEs, I believe you choose a site, not necessarily a preceptor. So you choose whether that be Memorial Hermann, Methodist, Bentaub, etc. And you can also choose based on region. So say you live in the northwest of Houston, like I'm initially from Tomball. And so I would, if I still lived there, I probably would have said, okay, can you pair me up in a hospital somewhere in the northwest of Houston? And so I will cautiously say that as my answer. You will learn so much more of this when you get into pharmacy school. And I don't want to solidify anything because changes are happening all the time. But from what I remember, IPPEs, you choose location, APPEs, you choose preceptors, and location, obviously. And Sakaya, can you work as a pharm tech in the summer? Absolutely. You can work as a pharm tech in the summer. You can work as a pharm tech during the year. Some of my friends, they'll work just to keep their employment. They'll go into work on the weekends. But again, remember, if pharmacy school is what you're pursuing and it's what you're in, that is your number one priority. So if you're starting to see that working is really causing your grades to suffer, just remember, you can't be a pharmacist without finishing out your PharmD degree. So just keep that in mind, but absolutely you can work. And it actually helps, I'd say, as far as when you're studying and you're being exposed to the medications, you're counseling patients, you're giving immunizations, it keeps you sharp.